When people hear the word Viking, one image almost always comes to mind: the attack on Lindisfarne in the year 793. For more than 1,000 years, that single event has been portrayed as the beginning of the Viking Age. It appears in textbooks, it appears in documentaries, it appears in museums. The story is usually simple: peaceful Christian monks, savage pagan raiders, civilization attacked by barbarism. But history is rarely that simple. Today we're asking a much more difficult question. Was Lindisfarne simply an easy target filled with gold? Or was it also something more? Was the attack connected to centuries of Christian expansion into pagan lands? Or were both explanations true at the same time? Today we'll examine the evidence. To understand Lindisfarne, we first need to understand Europe before the raid. By the late 8th century, Christianity had spread across much of Western Europe. The Frankish Empire under Charlemagne was expanding rapidly. Missionaries were active throughout northern Europe. Pagan kingdoms increasingly found themselves surrounded by Christian powers. Meanwhile, Scandinavia remained largely pagan. Its people traded throughout Europe. They knew Christian kingdoms well. Many Scandinavians had already visited England and France peacefully through commerce. The Vikings were not isolated from Europe. They understood its wealth, its politics, its religion, and its growing influence. Lindisfarne was founded around the year 635. It quickly became one of the most important monasteries in England. This was no ordinary church. It was a center of learning, a place where manuscripts were copied, relics preserved, books written, kings buried. Pilgrims traveled here from across Britain. Its religious importance made it famous. Its wealth made it vulnerable. In June of 793, Viking ships appeared off the coast. The attack was swift. Contemporary chroniclers describe murder, captivity, looting. The Anglo-Saxon chronicle records terrible portents before the raid. Church writers interpreted the attack as divine punishment. For Christian Europe, the psychological impact was enormous. No place seemed safe. Even God's own house had been violated. That shock echoed across medieval Europe. Monasteries made ideal targets. Unlike castles, they had little military protection. They often contained gold and silver liturgical objects, candlesticks, reliquaries, jewelry, imported goods, donations from kings, agricultural surplus, food stores, wine, and livestock. Monasteries represented concentrated wealth with minimal defenses. Even without any religious motive, they were attractive targets. This explanation remains the most widely accepted among historians. The treasures inside monasteries were extraordinary: gold altarpieces, silver communion vessels, jewels donated by nobles, precious manuscripts. Some items held immense religious value but also enormous material value. A Viking who melted a gold cross into bullion did not necessarily care about its religious symbolism. Gold was gold. Silver was silver. From a practical perspective, monasteries functioned almost like lightly defended banks. The emotional response came not simply because people were killed. Violence, unfortunately, was common during the Middle Ages. What made Lindisfarne unique was its symbolism. This was one of Christianity's holiest places in England. Its desecration appeared almost unimaginable. Church leaders interpreted the attack as God's punishment for Christian sins. Others viewed it as the arrival of apocalyptic enemies. The event became larger than the raid itself. It became a spiritual crisis. The traditional explanation is straightforward: the Vikings wanted riches. There is abundant evidence supporting this. Subsequent Viking raids consistently targeted wealthy locations: churches, trading towns, monasteries, ports, eventually entire cities. Economic opportunity clearly motivated many Viking expeditions. This explanation remains strongly supported by archaeology and documentary evidence. A second interpretation asks whether the attack carried political or religious meaning. Only decades before Lindisfarne, Charlemagne had launched brutal campaigns against the pagan Saxons. Thousands were reportedly executed, sacred groves destroyed, forced baptisms imposed. Missionaries increasingly entered northern Europe. To many pagan societies, Christianity was no longer simply another religion. It had become associated with expanding political power. Some scholars have suggested that attacking famous Christian centers may have carried symbolic value beyond simple robbery. Direct evidence that Lindisfarne specifically was revenge is limited. However, the broader historical context has led some historians to consider whether anti-Christian sentiment played some role in Viking decision-making. History often refuses simple answers. Human motivations are rarely singular. The Vikings could have wanted wealth. They could also have understood the symbolic impact of striking Christianity's most famous institutions. Economic motives and ideological motives are not mutually exclusive. An attack can generate profit while simultaneously sending a political or cultural message. Many historians today favor multifaceted explanations rather than searching for one single cause. Archaeology demonstrates extensive Viking trade before and after Lindisfarne. Scandinavians exchanged furs, amber, iron, slaves, and craft goods. Silver from the Islamic world reached Scandinavia in enormous quantities. Trade and raiding often existed side by side. Some expeditions likely intended commerce. Others shifted into raiding when opportunity presented itself. The archaeological record suggests economic motivations were central. Whether symbolic motivations accompanied them remains more difficult to prove. Nearly every written description comes from Christian observers. No Viking eyewitness account survives. That creates an important challenge. Christian writers understandably emphasize sacrilege. They interpreted events through religious belief. Their accounts are invaluable. But historians also recognize their perspectives. Modern scholarship compares these written records with archaeology and broader historical context to build a more balanced picture. Whether Lindisfarne was motivated by wealth, revenge, or both, one fact remains clear. The raid changed Europe. Within decades, Viking activity expanded dramatically. Raids evolved into settlements. Settlements became kingdoms. Trade networks expanded. Political alliances shifted. The Viking Age had begun. Was Lindisfarne merely a robbery? Or was it a message? The answer may never be fully known. The evidence clearly supports economic motives. Monasteries were wealthy, poorly defended, ideal targets. At the same time, the political climate surrounding Christian expansion into pagan territories cannot be ignored. Forced conversions, military campaigns, missionary activity, religious conflict. These formed the world in which the Vikings lived. Perhaps Lindisfarne was a robbery. Perhaps it was symbolic. Perhaps it was both. History often leaves us with probabilities rather than certainty. What matters most is understanding the complexity, rather than settling for simple narratives.